All right. We are live on Twitch and YouTube and Facebook and Kick. All right. Not too bad. How is everyone doing? We are trying out a new streaming time. It is currently 3:30 rather than 10 a.m. It's a little bit weird with daylight savings time. This room not having any windows. It feels like it's like I don't know, like 6-7 o'clock right now. That was unintentional. 5 or 6 o'clock, maybe 7. I don't know. But we're making some updates, some changes. You might see some of our logos and stuff are updating. That's really exciting. That's one of the things I'm working on. I'll give you a little preview here for our live audience right now. Let me make sure that I'm clicking on to the right things on Canva right now. So we got a little sneak preview for you here. This is our new banner graphic that is going to be adapted. It still needs to be like changed with like aspect ratios and things like that for different social platforms. But very excited about that. And then we have the logo variant. And those are the two that I have done right now. And so we're going for like a hyper-local sort of vibe. Kind of like our slogan here is go and be the church. And so because we're a community church, we're really involved with our community and in tune with its needs and seeking to meet those needs. And we're also sending people out from our church into their communities where they live, work, go to school, and play. And we want them to go and bring the light of Jesus to wherever they're at. So the drop pin is kind of an important symbolism for that. So that's pretty exciting. And so we've got these two sort of things that are starting to hit some of our social media accounts. We're going to roll it out kind of slowly so that we don't shock anybody. But it's pretty... it might be kind of just like, yeah, whatever. But it's pretty exciting to me. And so when I say it's pretty exciting stuff, I mean that I'm pretty excited by it. Yeah, trying out the new streaming time. We were mostly hitting people in Europe who were getting off of work, which is not a bad thing. Just, want to see if we can hit some people in our local context as well. But... We also just finished up a big project. We're working on a how to read the Bible course, and that is a lot of fun and a lot of work. And so that's going to be rolling out all throughout 2026. And so I'm pretty excited about that. Just got our studio set back up, and so I don't believe I did a live stream last week because everything was just in total disarray. And I was exhausted and feeling sick. And so now we're back. And at a new time, I'm excited. So we have our little skeleton friend back there, as well as our little tiny Jesus. And so they're going to be keeping me company during these streams. And we have a whole bunch of other studio stuff back here that you can't see. But you can see that I added another camera over there. Not quite sure what I want to do with that yet. But... We had an extra input and an extra camera, and so we figure, hey, might as well do something with it. I don't know what yet, but we'll get there. So, if you're joining us for the first time, my name is Matt, and I'm a pastor in Fremont, California, at Fremont.Church, and as a part of what I do here, I just hop on our live stream on Wednesdays and kind of chat a little bit about life, about faith, about what it's like to be a pastor, about confusing Bible passages or really difficult to navigate social issues, things like that. If you want to have conversations like this throughout the week, please scan the QR code. That'll take you to our Discord server, and we can keep the conversation going. So we also have, if you want to access all of our stuff, we have a link tree. We post stuff on YouTube pretty consistently every week. And we also have a Facebook group. If you're a little more old school and Discord isn't quite your thing, we have that as well. So exciting stuff. We are doing like I said, we're doing the How to Read the Bible course. I've also been doing a series of videos that I'm calling Through the Bible, where I'm literally just going chapter by chapter through the entire Bible and taking a look at what does this mean? And so it's kind of a nice entry level step into the overall narrative of the Bible. The How to Read the Bible course is really good for equipping you on reading the Bible on your own. And then there's plenty of academic resources if you want to go even deeper than I'm going. But yeah, there's people much smarter than me working on those. And so I'm just doing my best to kind of bridge the gap a little bit from kind of Sunday school, student ministry sort of level to the next level, which is often kind of just jumps to like really academic. But hey, I see we have Joyce here on Facebook saying happy birthday. It is my birthday. Thank you, Joyce. I appreciate that. It's been a nice chill day. Came into work, got a lot of work done, and everyone's been really nice. So they're typically really nice, so it's not like it was special for my birthday, but it is very exciting to be met with smiling faces today. So thank you. I appreciate that. I would love to jump into any topics of conversation that y'all would be interested in talking about if you have questions or comments. But as we get some folks filtering in, I kind of just want to take you along on the journey that I'm on for our Through the Bible series. And right now, where that's taking me is through the book of Exodus. And so you'll see on screen here is a series that I've been going through. I'm on session 12 of the book of Exodus. And this is kind of one of the resources that I use in my learning because they really break it down theme by theme, passage by passage. I'm not going that in depth on these videos, but it really gives me an idea of kind of the key themes and ideas that are maybe below the surface reading that I can kind of pass on to all of you. And so between my own reading and understanding and then getting a second opinion through the Bible Project videos, that's kind of been my system for how I approach stuff like this for our Through the Bible series. And so I kind of just want to take you along on the process, maybe provide some commentary along the way. You can kind of see me wrestle with the passage a little bit. I thought that might be interesting. So let me know what you think about this, and I can do more of it or less of it or change things altogether. So let's go ahead and see what the Bible Project has to say about the book of Exodus.
Plague narratives was so that you may know that I am Yahweh. And now they recognize, they've crossed the sea, and they realize it wasn't just fluke that the sea opened up and they had a way of escape. It was Yahweh who did it. So Yahweh is now known, and she's announcing the fulfillment of that theme. And we have this sort of neat bringing to justice of the Egyptians who had drowned the Hebrew boys. Now the Egyptian boys are being drowned, the Egyptian men. So there's a beautiful symmetry to the story and the role that the song plays in it that I just find really fun. Other things you want to talk about?
I'm kind of curious about verse 14. There's a pivot from this celebration of being saved almost into like this conquest of like what they're going to do. At this point, what do they understand about the surrounding nations and what kind of threat they are? I mean, are they conscious of anything outside of Egypt if they're slaves and kind of confined?
Yeah, when God tells them that he's going to bring them into the land, he usually lists the other nations who live there. So we had that back in chapter 3, when God meets Moses at the burning bush. Verse 8, I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And by the way, it's the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. So God is not hiding the fact that other people already live there. And so there's an anticipation of a kind of conflict to come, and bringing them out in divisions also sort of prefigures that, I think. But I don't know how extensive their knowledge would have been of these nations.
Yeah, this is really curious. This is something that I definitely want to unpack a little bit more, because there's this tension, I think, between the person of who Jesus is and then the God that we see in the Old Testament. That's kind of like, yeah, you're going to move into this land and I'm going to help conquer it for you. And there's a lot of people who die along the way. And so that's a really difficult thing to unpack. And I think there's a bit of God working in a way that speaks to the people of the time, that creates some cognitive dissonance for us, because we don't think of, like, no matter what your religion is, most popular religions, I would say, don't have a narrative, as far as I know, of like gods being in charge of conquering other people groups. And so it's a difficult thing that we don't really have in our 21st century American culture that is heavily prevalent in ancient Near Eastern cultures. And so that's a difficult thing to unpack. I don't know if we'll get to that in our Exodus video, but it is definitely going to come up at some point, because eventually the Israelites move into the Promised Land. And so we will have to discuss that at some point.
I don't know how aware they would have been of the world scene. Clearly enough to sing about Philistia, Edom, Moab, and Canaan. Egypt being what it was, sort of a major superpower of its time, it wouldn't surprise me that there would have been some knowledge of kind of international relations. And we know that the Israelites, the Hebrews, were not the only slaves in Egypt. The Egyptians loved to make stone, these panels, panoramic views of different parts of their daily life on their temples or whatever. And they had lots of other slaves that are pictured. It's not just the Hebrews. So they may have also known about nations based on who their fellow slaves were.
In verse 13,
that's interesting. That's something that I hadn't really thought too much about before. Like, I think we read a Bible story and we get really focused in on the key people groups or characters of that story, and can sometimes, at least I forget, to kind of look at the broader historical context of, like, yeah, there was probably other groups of slaves in Egypt and there's all these other listed cultures around that are doing something, and so what is kind of the word that gets around about that? Like, eventually we run into Rahab, who is not an Israelite, but comes to follow Yahweh, the one true God, because of what happens to the Israelites coming out of Egypt. And so word is obviously spreading.
I have the ESV, and it says, "You have led in your steadfast love the people whom you've redeemed." What would the Hebrews have known about God's love? I feel like in Exodus they're sort of learning a lot about his character and what he's done, and there's a lot of might and strength and triumph.
It's a good question.
Yes.
But not a lot about love. So for this to be in the song,
Yeah,
what would they
it
have
would
known?
it would be an interesting word study to track the word hesed and see what happens before this. We know later in the book that God's going to reveal himself as full of hesed, full of faithful covenant love. But how much they've experienced that or would have had a sense of that up to this time, I'm not sure.
That's true. A lot of what the Israelites would have had in their slavery in Egypt would have been just passed down through oral tradition. Nothing was written down yet. In fact, nothing gets written down for quite some time. I think it's something like Exodus 16. And so the entire book of Genesis and then the first 15 to 16 verses of Exodus are just passed down through oral tradition. And so it's interesting. They any idea of who God is to them would have been passed down from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Joseph, and then after Joseph, everything kind of spirals as new generations are born who probably heard it directly from Joseph, but then Pharaoh steps in and the Israelites are turned from kind of refugees into slaves, and then the line of God speaking through like key individuals is kind of broken for a while until we get to Moses, and then Moses kind of picks the baton back up and is hearing from God directly again.
It's a great question. Here's a fun tidbit. The name Mary is very common in the New Testament. We have Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary and Martha. There are at least 6 or 7 Marys in the New Testament, and all of them actually are called Miriam. Their name is Miriam in Greek. I don't know why it gets translated as Mary, but Miriam clearly has a huge, the memory of her work lives on for generations, and a pretty large percentage of families named their daughters Miriam in the first century. Richard Bauckham has done some studies on the frequency of names, and I'm just working from memory here, but I think it's something like 25% of all women were named Mary.
Wow.
Like you think
That's pretty
we
wild.
have names that just keep reoccurring over and over again, like Emma is number 1 in so many different countries. At least it was when I named our daughter Emma. But they had it even more, like lots and lots and lots of Marys. And it seems like Miriam's role in this story inspires generations of women to be like that, to be present when God is at work, and to be a witness to it and to participate in it in some way. That's very inspiring. All right, in the next session, we're going to talk about liminal space, that being in between, because now that they've crossed the sea, Israel is entering into the wilderness, and we'll talk about why God takes them through the wilderness and what is the point of this part of their journey.
All right, let's check out the next session. I am a big fan of liminal spaces. I find it
All
very
right,
interesting.
in this session, we're going to first learn a new word, and that word is liminal or liminality. I have lots of friends, and most people don't use that word. It's not a word that occurs a lot in just regular conversation. So let's define it first, and then we'll talk about how we experience it, because all of us do. So the word liminality comes from a Latin word limen, which means threshold. So if I'm standing on the threshold of a building, like in the doorway, I'm neither inside nor outside of the building. I'm just right on the boundary. And sociologists, anthropologists use the word liminality to talk about the seasons of life that we go through in which we're in between especially when there's a shift in identity. So a cultural anthropologist who's studying like coming of age ceremonies in other cultures or in any culture would study how liminality plays a role in that coming of age. If you can imagine a sort of tribal culture in which a young man, when he turns 13 years old, is sent off into the wilderness and he has to kill an animal and survive on his own for a certain amount of time, and then when he comes back, he's a man. He left as a boy and he comes back a man, and whatever he encountered in the wild sort of shapes him. That in between, the time out in the wild, is liminal space. He's been removed from the community and he hasn't been reintegrated yet, but when he reintegrates, he's somebody different. So I've read
that makes a lot of sense. In the story of Moses that we've covered so far, Moses, when he's grown up, he encounters an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and he steps in and he kills the Egyptian. Then he encounters a Hebrew fighting another Hebrew. He steps in and they call him out for murdering the Egyptian. He flees into the wilderness, and then when he comes back, he's got God with him, and he is looking to have Pharaoh allow the people to go and worship God, and eventually that leads into the Passover and the Exodus. And so Moses has a kind of coming of age sort of story like that, where he goes into the wilderness and then comes back a new person, essentially.
A fair bit about liminality now and how that functions in society. And we'll talk about how Israel is experiencing liminal space as they travel through the wilderness. But let's first talk about how we experience liminal space. What are some times that you've been through in your life that feel like transitional in between times?
I think I could speak to this a little bit. So I shared this with the classmates here over lunch yesterday that, so my parents immigrated from Romania. So I'm a first generation American. And growing up, my dad would call my little sister and I Americani. So we're like the Americans of the family, and it would always just grind my gears. But because I was like, no, I'm Romanian. But then I was born in America. So I'm technically, my citizenship is American. So I'm an American citizen, but technically my family's from Romania. So I sort of had this in-between of like, who am I? Like the identity crisis that Moses felt, I really resonated with that. And maybe even the Israelites in the wilderness, because it was like, I don't quite know, I'm technically American by my citizenship, but really my family is from Romania.
So what language should you speak? Yeah. What practices should you adopt?
And it was both.
There's this sort of blending. Mm-hmm. Good example. How about the rest of you?
Back in February, I was moving from an apartment into a house, and it just so happened that the week of my move was the week of the ice storm in Oregon. So we lost power in the apartment, and a tree fell on the house, and so for a week and a half, I was in the wilderness, I would say. Yeah. Couch hopping and, having great friends and places to stay, but sort of the sense of where do I live? Who do I, I've said goodbye to this one place. I haven't yet greeted this other place.
Yes.
Do I live in an apartment? Do I live in a house? Do I live anywhere?
I think for me that was my time post high school at community college, because I had pictured one trajectory for my life in the college that I wanted to go to, and then ended up pivoting and going in a different direction at the last second. And so decided, hey, I'm going to go to community college while I just kind of figure out what I want that next step to be. And so it's kind of like let me kind of just take some general ed courses while I figure out what I actually want to do. I think that's a pretty common experience for us in the United States.
All of these questions made that time just really strange.
Yeah.
And brought up a lot of sort of questions about everything, I guess, and
Yeah.
ice.
Even just your regular routines, the things you find comfort in, the predictability of like things you don't have to decide about because they're just the same thing you do every day. When that's stripped away, it can be very unsettling. Yeah. Other examples?
I guess one would be engagement,
Yeah.
before you're married.
Yes.
When you're
Yeah.
not married yet, but
Yeah.
you're somewhat more committed than
You're not married,
Yeah,
but you're not married.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I know who I'm going to spend the rest of my
Yeah.
life with, but we haven't fully, we're not fully experiencing married life. Yeah.
That's a good one.
weird in between.
Yes. Pregnancy is also like that. You're not a mom, but you're not quite a mom in the same way other people are moms yet. When you're pregnant, you
Yeah.
haven't held the child, you haven't nursed the child, you haven't changed a diaper yet. And so my first pregnancy ended in miscarriage, and I was caught in that liminal space for an extended period of time because like I had experienced part of kind of an induction into motherhood, but I had nothing to show for it. So it resulted in some really awkward things, like the first Mother's Day after my miscarriage, wondering if we were celebrating me or not. Like I went to a Mother's Day event at church and they were giving awards for them, or like giving prizes for the mom who'd come from the farthest and the mom who was the oldest and the mom who's like had been the mom for the least amount of time. And I just sat there kind of frozen, like, I don't even know if I
Yeah.
qualify,
That's really difficult.
just this sort of being caught. So liminal spaces are not comfortable. I don't know anyone who likes liminal space. I'm told there's a movie about a guy who lives in an airport for a really long time. What's it called? The Terminal. Yes, I haven't watched it, but an airport is not a place where we live, right? We're always passing through it to get somewhere else.
Yeah. To the best of my understanding prior to this, liminal spaces are most often spaces that carry you between one place and another. So like the airports or a parking lot or a stairwell or an elevator, anything like that, or in Moses's case, or what they're going to talk about is in Israel's case is the wilderness, because it's for Moses, he goes into the wilderness and then he comes back. For the Israelites, they go into the wilderness and then they continue into the land that has been promised to them. And so it's kind of a middle space in between where you've left and where you're going. So that makes that kind of helped me wrap my mind around it. It's also when you're there, you kind of get a feeling like I shouldn't be here. Like if you have a long layover in an airport, or if you're in a parking lot in the middle of the night, it's like it feels wrong to be here. I feel like I shouldn't stand here. Or if like in the stairwell in our apartment building, there's a window and it's really pretty to like look outside, but you go down the stairwell and you stop at the window and you're like, wait a second, I feel kind of weird standing here, even though like there's a window, like it's nice to look outside. I feel like I shouldn't be standing here.
And there's a sense of excitement maybe about going to an airport, but like you don't want to have to sleep there. And so somebody who lives in an airport is like caught in this liminal space for a really long period of time. As I was learning about liminality, I thought, wow, what a powerful way to express these things we go through, that we all go through at different times. And so I wrote about it in my book, Bearing God's Name. The book came out right before COVID hit. And I had no idea when I was writing about liminal space that suddenly the whole world would be thrust into liminal space at the same time, that all of our routines would be disrupted. We wouldn't be able to engage with each other in the same ways, go to work, go to church, travel, get groceries. Everything was different. And one of the hardest parts about COVID is that we didn't know how long it would last.
Yeah.
And so we're filming this like in the first week after masks are no longer required at the Bible Project, which is like very exciting to be with people more normally again.
Oh. Okay. That's odd.
we've just come out of 16 months or so of like wondering how long, like, do I plan that trip? Do I buy that plane ticket? Do I take that job? It's just it's been very awkward, in part because of how unbounded it is.
Yeah.
So Israel, as they enter into the wilderness, is entering into that kind of a space. There's no Walmart. There's no, there's no corner store. There's none of the, even slavery had its own sense of predictability. They knew what was expected of them.
Yeah.
And now they enter into the.
There are passages after the Israelites come out of Egypt that things are, it has that liminality in the wilderness, and they even say, like, why did you bring us out of slavery in Egypt? Like, why did you take us out of there? At least then we could count on having food every day. And they had their routine, and it was predictable. There's this principle that was studied for people struggling with depression, where even if they logically knew that their depression was not healthy for them, that they would hesitate to take steps into new health and new practices because it's new. And the thing that was unhealthy for them was predictable, and it was familiar. So that can be really challenging.
The wilderness, and everything is up for grabs again. Who's in charge? Where do we find food and water? When are we going to get there? Where are we even going? What's the plan? All of that is unsettled. And I'm convinced that God has lessons to teach us that can only be learned in liminal space.
Yeah.
Only in a state of dislocation. This is not just a necessary evil, like they've got to get through the wilderness to get to the promised land. This is actually the workshop of their character. God is remaking the people. He's got to get Egypt out of them before they can. He's already gotten them out of Egypt, but Egypt has to get out of them before they're ready for life in the land. And it takes quite a while for them to go through that experience. So it's the end of chapter 15 where they leave the Sea of Reeds. They've already been camping out for a little while before they get to the sea, but it's really after the sea that they have this sense of closure. They are not going back to Egypt. The army is drowned. They're not going to be pursued anymore. They are actually free. So I would say the wilderness starts there in chapter 15, verse 22. And right off the bat, they lack water. For 3 days, they traveled in the desert without finding water. That's a little scary. I just went dry camping last weekend, which means like camping in a place where there's no running water. There was a river, but like no tap.
Yeah.
And, no flush toilets, just pit toilets. And you have to bring in your own drinking water. And like we were there for 4 days, and at the beginning of day 3, I'm like, we are almost out of drinking water. I'm like, that's not going to work very well. And of course, we could just get in our car and drive to the next, drive an hour and go buy water. Israel didn't have that option. When you're in the wilderness and there's no water to drink, what do you do? So they struggle. They come to Mara, and there's water, but it's bitter water. And so there's this constant process of them learning to trust that the same God who got them out of Egypt is bringing them to a place, like will provide what they need on the way, and is bringing them to a place of rest. And that trust is like the main lesson that we learn in liminal space. Will we trust that God has got this? Or will we freak out and become anxious about all the ways that we can't control what's happening?
Yeah, I think that's heavily prevalent in the modern day when we think of like jobs and finance, when we're going through transitions in that sense, where there is a level of uncertainty that we don't like to deal with, but I feel like it really stretches our faith.
The wilderness chapters stretch from the end of 15 through 16, 17, and then 18. It's in 19 that they arrive at Sinai. Chapter 19 begins with, on the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt. So remember, the calendar starts over when they cross the sea. So on the first day of the third month, so they've been traveling now for 2 full months. On that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. So that's its own thing, right? Coming to Sinai and meeting Yahweh. But up through chapter 18 is this wilderness experience. I want to share with you some things I've discovered about these wilderness narratives that blew my mind. Again, this goes in the category of literary design and what we're seeing in as far as intentional, like the artistry with which these stories.
This kind of is reminiscent of a bell curve for storytelling, where you have your exposition, and then your rising action, your climax, your falling action, and then your resolution. And we see this, it's, oh man, I'm blanking on the term right now. We talk about it in our How to Read the Bible course. But essentially, if you were to fold a scroll in half, because scrolls kind of roll up to the center, if you open up the center, then you'll see the most important thing. Leviticus is in the center of the Torah. And so if you pay attention in your Bible to what's kind of at the brackets, the sides, and then at the center of the passage or the book of the Bible, or the collection of books like the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, you can kind of see what the, for lack of a better term, like the thesis is, or what the main point is, or the most important thing mentioned in that writing.
Are told is just mind-blowing. So this diagram is meant to kind of show you visually how the Sinai narratives stretch from Exodus 19 to Numbers 10. They're going to be at Sinai for the rest of Exodus, starting in 19 verse 1, rest of Exodus, all of Leviticus, and the first 10 chapters of Numbers. They're at Sinai. It's a long stay. Actually, not that long, but a lot of text about that time. And immediately on either side, they're traveling through the wilderness. And if you've ever done a Bible read through before and you get to Numbers, you get this sense of deja vu. Like, I feel like I've read this before. They're complaining because they don't have water, and then God gives them water from a rock. Or they complaining because they don't have food and God provides manna. Or they are complaining against Moses' leadership or whatever. There's so many things in Numbers that are like, I feel like I've read this before. So I want to show you kind of visually how that works. There are 7 deserts mentioned in the desert travels, and Sinai's the third. So they go through 2 deserts, get to Sinai, and then, so 7's a good biblical number, right? And 3 is a good biblical number. Sinai's the third. And 10 times in the wilderness narratives, it says they camped somewhere, and they camped. 10 times. 10 is another good number. We've got the 10 words God speaks in, 10 times in Genesis 1, it says, and God said. We've got 10 plagues. We'll have 10 commandments coming up. There's lots of 10s. And there's 10 times that they are said to have camped. But we know from Numbers chapter 33 that they camped at 42 different spots. We get a full itinerary in Numbers 33 of all the places they camped, 42 spots. Only 10 of them make it into this narrative. Not because there's a discrepancy between these two. I think because when you're doing a family photo album of your trip to Southern California, you don't put every rest stop or every motel overnight in your, you focus on Disneyland, you focus on SeaWorld, like you focus on Yosemite. The big things that you saw that were memorable make it into your book, and all the other little stops are less.
Yeah, the Bible also works in a lot of like round numbers, and so whenever you see something like this many thousand people or this many tens of people, typically it's not going for accuracy, there's often some sort of poetic thing that is going on there. And Hebrew writing in general is very poetic in nature, whereas American English writing is typically very scientific in nature. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect there sometimes when we're reading the Bible.
It's less important to convey in your album. I think that's what's going on here. We get sort of the highlights in Exodus and in Numbers in the wilderness narratives, and then some really detailed person who was on the trip was taking a very careful list, and they included the list in Numbers 33. We have the mention of 6 campsites on either side of Sinai, like as if it's framing these Sinai narratives. We have twice before Sinai and twice after Sinai the mention that there's no water and the people are thirsty. So again, deja vu. If you're reading in Numbers, you're like, I feel like I've read this before. Once on either side, they get water from a rock. Once on either side, there's a mention of quail and manna.
That's
even though we
interesting.
know later, like we know from other statements, that God gave them manna every single day, 6 days a week, for the entire time they lived in the wilderness. It's only actually mentioned once in each set of wilderness narratives.
That's crazy.
Once on either side, we have a mention of the angel of Yahweh
This is here, really pause.
doing something.
This is why it's so important to read the Bible as a whole narrative, because this is even something that I've missed in reading the Torah, and what part of why I'm doing this through the Bible series is because there's how many 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 of these parallels from either side of Mount Sinai, their journey into the wilderness and then their journey out of the wilderness. And there's all these parallels. This is crazy.
Once on either side, they have a battle with the Amalekites. That seems kind of specific. Once on either side, they lament having left Egypt. Once on either side, there's a leadership struggle. Once on either side, there's a Midianite relative who helps Moses. Like, again, pretty specific. So we have Jethro in chapter 18 of Exodus, and then in Numbers, I think it's Numbers 10, where Moses asks Hobab, another Midianite relative, for help navigating the wilderness. So we've got a Midianite relative of Moses who helps. And then we have complaints and rebellion on either side. It is striking, and I think literarily what we see here is that the wilderness narratives are they're creating a frame around the Sinai narratives. And if you think about how a frame functions around a painting, if you have a beautiful painting and you put it in a frame with a wide mat around it, you're not supposed to look at the frame. Your eyes are supposed to be drawn to the center. That's where the important thing is. And by telling the stories in these ways, by mirroring in Numbers what happened in Exodus, our eyes are being drawn to the center, to the Sinai narratives, what's happening here. And we see how important that is. So I asked you if you had an opportunity before this session to read through the wilderness narratives in Numbers and compare that with the wilderness narratives in Exodus. And I'm curious if anybody had a chance to do that, and if so, what did you notice? What was similar? What was different?
I could be remembering this incorrectly, but when Miriam's rebellion happened and she and some of the other leaders tried to usurp Moses, and she was stricken with some sort of flaky white skin disease, was that drawing back to one of the signs that Moses didn't have to do, where he put his hand in his cloak and then withdrew it?
I think it's the same thing, the same disease that she gets, that he was going to have as a sign. Yes, and that's maybe a side conversation, but I'll just throw in a nugget here. It often bothered me that Miriam and Aaron both rebel against Moses, but only Miriam is stricken with this disease. Like, why does Aaron get off scot-free? It feels sort of like, it feels unfair. And so I've done some thinking about it, and I now have something that satisfies me. We'll see if it satisfies others. I think there's two reasons why only Miriam is struck. One is because Aaron is the high priest. If the high priest is struck with a skin disease, he is no longer able to mediate between the people and God. So like all the temple rituals, sacrifices would be grinding to a halt while we wait for him to recover. So it would actually affect more than just him, it would affect the whole community, which would be really negative. But I think even more than that, I think Aaron is being shown up in this episode because Miriam and Aaron are like, aren't we prophets too? Don't we hear from the Lord? Like, why do you think you're better than we are? And by striking Miriam with leprosy or with a skin disease and having Aaron recognize, I don't know what to do about this. Moses, can you pray for us so that she's healed? It actually shames Aaron and shows his need for Moses' leadership.
That's good.
So we might feel like he's being left out, but actually the core issue is his insubordination to Moses, and by having to ask Moses to pray for her, it's showing the limits of what he can do as high priest. Moses.
Yeah, that's very true. The skin disease that they're talking about is one of the signs with Moses at the burning bush, and then God says this will be a sign that I'm with you, and that I'm speaking through you. And he ends up not using that. He doesn't need that when he talks to Pharaoh. It's not a part of the 10 plagues, but it comes up here.
Can not just recognize a skin disease, he can bring healing to the skin disease, which is what we see when he puts his hand in his bosom and it comes out diseased, and then he puts it in and he's healed. Moses has an authority that goes beyond a priestly authority. All the priest can do is say, yep, you have a skin disease. You have to go isolate and come back and I'll inspect you again. The priests don't actually heal the disease. So by showing that Aaron had kind of reached his limit, it puts him in his place. Yeah, that's a great episode to bring out.
Yeah, Moses is also told by God that he will be like God to Aaron. And so there's a level of like Aaron will be speaking on behalf of Moses, but it's also like an elevation of Moses beyond his role as a priest or a prophet or a leader, to not the same power as God, but he is going to be essentially the mouthpiece or the representative or the go-between for God.
Something I noticed in, I think, the story about bringing the water out of the rock that was really different in Numbers than in Exodus is sort of the attitude of God. You hear more that he's angry, and there's a lot more like emotive words in the Numbers account than there is in the Exodus account.
Yes, and this is pretty consistent across these accounts. Did you notice God, when the people complain in Exodus, God is very gracious and gives them what they need. When they complain in Numbers, God is not happy, and he judges them, and he sends fire among them, or he sends a plague among them. Like the punishment is much more severe in Numbers. Why might that be? What's the difference between Exodus and Numbers?
Is it just time?
I wonder if it's because they know, right? They know that like they've experienced who God is, and at this point they should understand and should be faithful. Before they were very new to having this personal relationship with God, while they were in slavery. But now it's personal, and now they should know better.
They've had so many chances to figure it
I
out.
think part of it's time, but I think if it had just been one long trip in the wilderness, we wouldn't necessarily see that contrast. What's the divide between them?
Sinai.
Yeah, Sinai. Say more about that.
I guess it's more of, I've given you my words.
Yeah.
This is how you should live.
You know better
You know
now.
better. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're a parent of a small child and your child misbehaves, like they sort of break a rule they don't know that is a rule. Like they do something, you're like, oh, no, we don't do that. We don't lick the floor in the airport, or we don't, whatever it is, crazy thing. I had a friend whose kid did that right after COVID started. Like they're in the airport, traveling back to the States and from overseas, and their son's over there licking the carpet, and they're like, oh no. So kids do things, right? And they just don't know any better. They just think, I wonder what this tastes like.
Yeah, kids be doing things.
But when they're older and you've taught them about germs, it's no longer okay. And so the judgment is harsher once they've been taught. And I think that's what's going on with the wilderness narratives. Sinai is the place where God lays out everything they need to know about how to live faithfully with him. They know better now. They're not newly brought out of Egypt. They've sort of they're expected to be growing into this new role as the nation taught by God, rescued by God. They know better. They've all been given that opportunity. So we do see a contrast. In spite of all these similarities, all these similar events, God does show a lot more negative emotion or more anger after Sinai.
Carmen, can you just quickly talk about the quail incident? And it seemed like it was so gracious in the Exodus story, and then in the Numbers story, it's like they craved quail, and then before it even touched their teeth, were stricken.
Yeah, I think part of what's going on with the food in Numbers is that God has been providing food for them. They just don't like the flavor. They don't like the kind of food he's providing. So whereas in Exodus there's a desperation, like we need to eat or we need water, by Numbers they're like, okay, we want a different kind of food. We don't really like what you ordered for us. And so there's a despising what God has provided and refusing to receive it as gracious provision. So I think that's why there's a harsher judgment toward them. Like rather than just trusting God and being grateful for what he provides, they're like, yeah, I'm kind of tired of this. You got anything else? And I think it's dangerous when we don't receive what God gives. One of the things that my students and I have often talked about is, okay, so the Bible seems to invite us to lament. The Psalms are full of lament, but complaint is not quite the same thing. It's judged pretty harshly in Numbers. So what's the difference between complaint and lament?
That's an important difference.
It seems like complaint probably has more to do with entitlement.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Whereas lament is more just the emotional response to what's going on.
Yeah, I like how you said that. Yeah, lament is often in the Psalms calling upon God to act in a way that's consistent with his character and his promises. Lord, you said you were good. You said you would protect us, but look, all the nations are invading us and they're ravaging your inheritance, and why haven't you acted on our behalf? Whereas with complaint, it's just like, yeah, I don't like what's for dinner, or I don't like the way you're doing things or the way you're living, the way we're having to live. Yeah, so it also seems to me like complaint is often horizontal, like we say to each other what we don't like, and lament is, Lord, here's what we need. Where are you? And I think when we direct our complaints to God with the attitude of, like, I am grateful for what you give, but this isn't working for me right now. That's different than just belly aching to each other about how, I don't like the leadership that's in place or whatever. Okay, a couple more things I want to show you before this session closes. As I started digging into this framing on either side of the Sinai narratives, I started wondering, if you've watched the How to Read the Bible series with the Bible Project, one of the
Great
literary
series.
devices that Tim talks about is chiasm, which is like
Chiasm.
a literary
That's
sandwich,
what it is.
like ABCBA structure. And usually the focus of these chiasms or literary sandwiches is the center. So the other things frame the center. So I'm seeing here that there's a framing going on of the Sinai narratives, but I started to wonder, like, are these in order? Like, is it just random, like we have a grab bag on either side, or are they in a particular order? So I'm going to go to this slide and show you what blew my mind. For the month of May, I was working on this, and I just said, I had seen like a couple of people suggest that there were a couple of things in order making a chiasm. And I'm like, oh, but I have a lot more things on my list, and I'm wondering if they fit too. And every time I looked, it got more detailed. So in the very center of the chiasm, we have the Sinai narratives that stretch from Exodus 19 to Numbers 10. And this will probably be hard to get all down on paper, but you can look at the slides later. So right before it, we have the arrival at Sinai, and right after we have the departure from Sinai. That seems obvious. I mentioned that on either side, Moses is assisted by a Midianite family member, so Jethro and Hobab, and it's right in order, right before the arrival and right after the departure. On either side of that, we have Moses talking about his leadership burden, like, oh, Jethro says to Moses,
this is
wild. This is too much for you. You're trying to do too much. And then in Numbers 11, Moses complains about exactly that. This is too much for me. I can't do it. On either side of that, we have a conflict with Moses' family members, potentially. So in 18:1-6, Jethro brings Zipporah and the sons back to Moses because he had sent her away. There's a sort of shadow of a conflict. We don't know if there was conflict, but it seems like there could have been. And we have then the story of Miriam and Aaron in Numbers 12, where there's conflict with Moses.
Okay,
then we have the battle with the Amalekites, and Joshua is the one who wins the battle in Exodus, and Joshua is mentioned in these chapters 13 and 14. Joshua is one of the spies or scouts that goes into the land, so it falls in the right place. On either side of that, we have sort of a cluster of texts. So there's I've listed several different events here, 4 different events that don't occur in the same order because I think they have their own logic and numbers for why they're in that order. We have a cluster of complaining about food, God providing food, Sabbath laws, breaking Sabbath, opposing Moses, and getting water from a rock. Those clusters are on either side.
Wow.
Then we have springs of water on either side of that. And then a song of victory over Pharaoh, a song of victory over Sihon on either side. And then on either side of that, now we're out of the wilderness narratives, but it's just like framing that. We have the angel of Yahweh protecting Israel and the angel of Yahweh protecting Israel. First Egypt, then Moab. And then on either side of that, we have the showdown with Pharaoh and the showdown with Balak, king of Moab.
Wow.
And it just felt like every time I thought, well, there's a gap here that's not matching, I'd look at the gap and, oh, that matches too. It's like this massive literary sandwich all around the Sinai narratives in the center. So cool.
That's incredible.
So with this chiasm in mind, like 10 levels of whatever, now go back to this slide. And this is zooming us in on the Sinai narratives. So if you just look at the Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers part of it, you might be familiar with the work of Michael Morales. He has a book on Leviticus, Who Shall Ascend, Who May Ascend the Mountain of the Lord. An amazing book, A Biblical Theology of Leviticus. And he shows that the whole book of Leviticus is a chiasm. And that's true in the Bible Project video on Leviticus too, that they do a fantastic job of showing how the different sections mirror each other. You've got rituals on the outside, then priesthood, then purity, and at the very center is the Day of Atonement. So that chiasm is in the middle of the chiasm I just showed you. And you've got this like massive mountain, chiasm mountain. Isn't that fun?
That's good stuff.
I love it. There it is. So our key takeaway, we've talked about some similarities and differences, but I just want to highlight this one thing, that the people's ingratitude and rebellion meets God's gracious provision in the wilderness. There's these cycles of work and rest that get established in the wilderness. God doesn't just provide manna. He provides it 6 days and asks them to rest on the 7th, to begin marching to the beat of a different drum, to have a different rhythm of life. They're not going to be slaves and work 24/7. They're going to rest. And that results in a contrast between the way they had to serve Pharaoh and what it's going to look like to serve Yahweh. Yeah. And one place where you can see this, which I love, is 16 verse 4, says, the Lord says to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. And that phrase, enough for that day, is davar yom bayomo. The the thing day by day. That's the exact same phrase that Pharaoh uses to talk about the quota of bricks they have to make.
Wow.
Make sure they're doing their davar yom bayom in chapter 5. And so Pharaoh's daily provision is do this work for me to prop up my funerary cult. And Yahweh's like, your thing for each day is what I'm graciously giving you and you're receiving as a gift. So I love that contrast. In the next session, we're going to zero in on this burden of leadership that Moses feels and look at how the Jethro story in Exodus 18 kind of helps shape the book as a whole.
Man, what good stuff. Let me know if you guys enjoyed kind of journeying with me as we're kind of doing some research on the book of Exodus for our Through the Bible series, because I'm going to be doing more of it anyway, and I would love to bring you along in the journey with me. Man, it's just so great. We'll get there in the book of Leviticus, but the contrast of serving God versus serving Pharaoh, and Pharaoh saying work, 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 and God saying, yes, work, but also rest in these periods of 7. On the 7th day, you rest. In the 7th year, all of the slaves are released. And then in the 50th year, which is a nice round number for 7 times 7, which is 49, then actually all of the land gets returned to its original owners. And it's these radical concepts that undercut these ideas of like working yourself to the bone and owning people as property and amassing great areas of land and great riches. And it begins to undercut those things to kind of begin a snowball that ultimately ends up with Jesus saying that none of these things are present in the kingdom of God, in the kingdom of heaven. And so, man, thank you for joining our Wednesday live stream. I hope you enjoyed this new streaming time. Again, let me know what is going to work best for all of you as we're kind of still tinkering and getting this church chat stream off the ground. So once again, thank you for joining us. Scan the QR code, check out the link tree. We have tons of ways that we are looking to bring the church